Emma sat cross-legged on her bed. Her hands clenched tightly around a worn-out stuffed rabbit. She could hear Noah's giggles from the living room as Clarissa played the role of a perfect mother. The sound of his laughter twisted her heart. It was the only thing that made enduring Clarissa's cruelty bearable. If Noah was happy, Emma told herself, it was worth it. But when the laughter stopped and the door to her room creaked open, Emma's heart sank. Clarissa stood in the doorway. Her smile gone, replaced with a cold sneer. You're useless, Clarissa hissed. Can't you do anything right? Emma bowed her head, her fingers digging into the plush rabbit. She wanted to scream, to tell her father the truth. But Clarissa's threats echoed in her mind. Say one word to your dad, and Noah will pay the price. So Emma kept quiet. She swallowed her tears, forcing herself to be invisible, as Clarissa demanded. For Noah's sake, she would endure it all. The aroma of pancakes wafted through the house, and Emma could hear Noah's laughter spilling from the kitchen. Clarissa's voice was soft and sweet as she coaxed Noah into eating another bite. It was the image of a perfect family, except Emma knew better. As Emma made her way downstairs, she glanced at her reflection in the hallway mirror. She hardly recognized herself anymore. Her eyes, once bright with the joy of childhood, were now dull and tired. She quickly smoothed her hair and took a deep breath before entering the kitchen. There you are, sleepyhead, Clarissa chirped, her voice syrupy and sweet. Noah looked up from his plate, beaming. Emma, look. Pancakes. Just the way I like them. Noah's enthusiasm was contagious. But Emma's smile felt hollow. Clarissa set a plate down in front of her, the smile still plastered on her face. But her eyes were ice. Eat up, darling. You'll need your strength today. Emma's stomach tightened, and she could already tell it was going to be one of those days, the ones where Clarissa's temper simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest thing to set her off. She picked up her fork, forcing herself to take a bite. Across the table, Noah was blissfully unaware, chatting about school and friends. Clarissa's hand landed gently on Noah's shoulder. Why don't you go get your shoes on, sweetheart? We don't want to be late for soccer practice. Noah nodded, hopping off his chair and running to the hallway, leaving Emma alone with Clarissa. The moment the door closed behind him, Clarissa's smile dropped. You didn't fold the laundry last night, she said coldly, her tone venomous. I don't care about your excuses, Clarissa snapped. You think your homework matters? You'll never amount to anything. If you weren't so pathetic, maybe your father wouldn't have to marry someone like me to fix this mess of a family. Emma's heart pounded, but she stayed quiet. She knew better than to argue. Every word out of her mouth only made things worse. You'll fix your mistake tonight, Clarissa said, her voice low and dangerous. Or Noah will pay for it. Emma nodded, swallowing back the lump in her throat. She heard Noah's footsteps returning, and Clarissa's smile instantly reappeared. The following day started like any other. Thomas had left for work early, kissing Noah on the head and giving Emma a warm smile before he walked out the door. Clarissa was in her usual mood, barking orders and making snide comments about Emma's uselessness. But what none of them knew was that Thomas would be coming home early. A business meeting had been cancelled, and he decided to surprise the kids by taking them out for dinner. He was looking forward to seeing the smiles on their faces, imagining Clarissa as the perfect stepmother she always appeared to be. As Thomas pulled into the driveway, He noticed the house was unusually quiet. He stepped inside and called out, "I'm home." "You ungrateful little brat." Clarissa spat. Her voice a sharp contrast to the soft tone she used in front of Noah. "You're lucky I let you live in this house. If it weren't for your father, I'd have thrown you and your brother out ages ago." Emma stood frozen, her back pressed against the counter, tears glistening in her eyes. Thomas's heart dropped. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His perfect wife, the one he trusted with his children, was standing there, spewing venom at his daughter. "Clarissa!" His voice boomed across the room, startling both women. Clarissa spun around, her face paling as she saw him standing in the doorway. "Thomas! You're home early," her voice faltered, and she quickly tried to plaster on a smile. "We were just having a little disagreement. You know how teenagers can be." But Thomas wasn't buying it. His eyes moved from Clarissa's forced smile to Emma, whose face was streaked with tears. The truth was plain in her eyes. This wasn't a one-time outburst. This was something that had been going on for a long time. The silence that followed was deafening. "Clarissa," Thomas began, his voice low. "What have you been doing to my children?" Clarissa's smile wavered. I've been taking care of them. I'm their mother." "You are not their mother." Thomas's voice rose, cutting her off. "I've trusted you with them. And this is what you've been doing. Threatening my daughter. Hurting her." Clarissa's face twisted in anger. "You don't know what it's like, Thomas. She's impossible. Always defying me. Always making things difficult." "No," Thomas interrupted, shaking his head in disbelief. "The only thing that's impossible here is that I didn't see this sooner." Clarissa opened her mouth to speak, but Thomas held up a hand, silencing her. "I need you to leave. Now." "What?" Clarissa blinked, her anger quickly morphing into panic. "Thomas! You can't be serious." "Get out of this house," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You're done here." Clarissa stood frozen, her perfect image crumbling as she realized Thomas wasn't going to change his mind. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "Do you think those children can survive without me? I've kept this family together. Without me, you'll fall apart." But Thomas's expression was set in stone. "The only thing I regret is ever letting you near my kids." Clarissa's lips curled, but she knew the fight was over. She stormed upstairs, slamming doors as she packed her things, muttering curses under her breath. Meanwhile, Thomas sat on the couch, his mind racing. Every moment Emma had been quiet. Every forced smile, every shadow of fear in her eyes, it all made sense now. When Clarissa finally left the house, suitcase in hand, Thomas shut the door behind her and locked it, as if sealing away years of deceit and misery. He stood in the silence for a moment, taking in the weight of his decision. Then, with a deep breath, he climbed the stairs to check on his children. He found Noah in his room, playing with his toy cars, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed. Emma, however, was in her room, curled up on the bed with her knees drawn to her chest. "Emma?" Thomas said softly, knocking gently on her door before stepping inside. Emma looked up, her eyes red from crying. "Is she gone?" she whispered, her voice small and uncertain. Thomas sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Yes. She's gone. She's not coming back. Emma's body trembled as she leaned into him. For the first time in years. She felt safe, but the safety felt strange. Unfamiliar. Like a dream she didn't trust. I'm so sorry. Sweetheart. Thomas whispered. His voice thick with guilt. I should have seen it. I should have known. Emma shook her head. You couldn't have known. She was always different when you were here. Thomas clenched his jaw, hating how long his daughter had suffered in silence. But it's over now, he said firmly. I promise you. Emma. I'll never let anyone hurt you or Noah again. The days that followed were awkward and tentative. Thomas found himself constantly second-guessing his every move. Unsure how to rebuild the trust he had unknowingly allowed to be broken. Emma was quieter than usual, often retreating into her room. Thomas didn't press her to talk, he knew healing would take time. Instead, he tried to be present in small ways, cooking breakfast, helping with homework, and sitting with her in comfortable silence when words felt too heavy. Noah, however, struggled with the sudden absence of Clarissa. Where's Clarissa? He asked one morning over cereal. His brow furrowed in confusion. Thomas exchanged a glance with Emma, who stiffened at the mention of her name. Clarissa isn't going to be living with us anymore, Thomas said carefully. Why not? Noah's voice was small, his eyes wide with worry. Thomas took a deep breath. Because she wasn't treating Emma the way she should have. And I made a promise to keep you both safe. Noah's gaze shifted to Emma, who gave him a small, reassuring smile. It wasn't easy for Noah to understand. But over time, he began to see the changes in his sister, the way she no longer flinched when someone raised their voice. The way her smiles slowly became more genuine. One afternoon, Thomas found Emma sitting in the backyard, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He joined her quietly, sitting on the steps beside her. Do you want to talk about it? He asked gently. Thomas shook his head. What happened isn't your fault, Emma. You were doing what you thought was best, protecting Noah, keeping peace. Emma wiped at her eyes. I just didn't want to hurt you. You were so happy with her. I thought if I could just hold on, things would get better. Thomas's heart ached at her words. I was wrong to think she could be the mother you needed. I see that now. But I'm here, Emma. And I'll do everything I can to make up for the time you lost. They sat in silence for a while, the autumn breeze stirring the leaves around them. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt the weight of her burden start to lift, just a little. Thomas noticed her struggle and decided to make an effort to reconnect with both Emma and Noah. Even though it wasn't easy. One rainy Sunday afternoon, he knocked on Emma's door, carrying a cardboard box in his hands. What's that? Emma asked, curious but guarded. Thomas smiled gently. Some of your mom's things. I thought, maybe we could go through them together. Emma's breath caught. It had been years since they talked about her real mother. Clarissa had always discouraged it, saying it was time to move on. Thomas set the box on the bed and sat down beside Emma. You don't have to if you don't want to, he said, giving her an out. But I thought, it might help us remember her. In a good way. Emma hesitated for a moment, then slowly lifted the lid of the box. Inside were old photos, handwritten notes, And trinkets from her mother's life, things she had barely remembered. Her fingers brushed against a framed photograph of her mother holding her as a baby. And a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I remember this day," Emma whispered. "We were at the lake." Thomas nodded, his own eyes misty with memory. "She loved taking you kids to the lake. Said it was the only time she ever felt truly at peace." Emma stared at the photo for a moment longer. Then placed it gently on her nightstand. "I want to go back there," she said softly. Thomas smiled. "Then we'll go." The following weekend, Thomas took Emma and Noah on a trip to the lake their mother had loved so much. The drive was quiet but not uncomfortable, just the hum of the car engine and the sound of leaves rustling outside the windows. When they arrived, the lake was just as Emma remembered it, calm, with the water glimmering under the soft autumn sun. A sense of peace settled over her as she stepped out of the car. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe freely. "Can we swim?" Noah asked eagerly, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Thomas laughed. "It's a little cold, buddy. But if you're brave enough, go for it." "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded. "Yeah. It feels nice to be here." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the gentle lapping of the water soothing Emma's frayed nerves. After some time, Noah ran over with a collection of small, smooth stones. "Look, Emma. We can skip them on the water." Emma smiled, taking one of the stones from his hand. She stood and walked to the water's edge, flicking her wrist. The stone skipped across the surface once, twice, 3 times before sinking. Noah cheered. And for a moment, Emma felt light, like she was just a girl having fun with her brother. "Nice throw," Thomas said, grinning at her. Emma's smile was small but genuine. "Thanks." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the 3 of them sat together, wrapped in blankets, eating sandwiches Thomas had packed. It wasn't perfect, there were still unspoken words and lingering sadness, but for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like they were starting to find their way back to each other. Thomas noticed the change and felt a surge of hope. But he knew better than to rush things. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It had to be earned, one small step at a time. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Noah curled up with a book on the couch. Emma surprised Thomas by speaking up. "Dad?" she asked softly. Thomas set down his newspaper, giving her his full attention. "Yeah, sweetheart?" Emma fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "I've been thinking. I want to try therapy. Just to, talk to someone." Emma gave him a small nod. And for the first time, Thomas felt like they were truly moving forward. A few weeks later, Emma started seeing a therapist. At first, it was awkward and uncomfortable, she wasn't used to talking about her feelings. But little by little, she found it easier to open up. Her therapist helped her process the guilt and fear she had carried for so long. And with each session, Emma felt lighter. At home, things continued to improve. Thomas made a point of being more present in his children's lives. He cooked dinner with them, helped with homework, and made time for fun, things he had taken for granted before. Noah adjusted to life without Clarissa. slowly realizing that their family was better off without her. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Emma looked around at her father and brother. A sense of peace settling over her. They weren't perfect, but they were a family, a real one this time. "Hey, Dad," Emma said, her voice steady. Thomas looked up, smiling. "Yeah. I was thinking, maybe we could adopt a dog." Thomas chuckled. "A dog? Huh. That's a big responsibility." Emma grinned. "I think we're ready for it." Thomas pretended to think for a moment, but the smile on his face gave him away. "All right. Let's start looking this weekend." Noah cheered. And Emma laughed, a real, joyful laugh that echoed through the house. For the first time in a long while, the sound of happiness filled their home. The weekend arrived. And as promised, Thomas took Emma and Noah to the animal shelter. The shelter was filled with wagging tails and soft meows. And Noah ran from kennel to kennel, excitedly pointing at every dog he saw. Emma, however, was drawn to a quiet corner, where a small, scruffy dog with brown and white fur sat quietly, its sad eyes mirroring her own. "Hey there," Emma whispered, kneeling in front of the kennel. The dog's ears perked up slightly, and it took a few cautious steps toward her. A volunteer approached, smiling. "That's Buddy. He's a bit shy, but he's a sweetheart once he warms up." Emma glanced at her father. "Can we meet him?" Thomas nodded. And soon Buddy was led into a small playroom. At first, the dog seemed unsure, but Emma sat patiently on the floor, giving him space. Eventually, Buddy came over, sniffed her hand, and rested his head on her knee. Emma smiled, feeling a connection with the little dog. "I think he's the one," she said softly. Thomas ruffled Buddy's fur. "Then let's bring him home." Noah cheered, already planning all the games he would play with their new friend. One evening, after Buddy had curled up beside her on the couch, Noah sat down next to Emma. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Emma looked at him, surprised. "For what?" "For not noticing what she did to you," Noah said, his voice quiet. "You went through all of that, for me." Emma smiled and pulled him into a hug. "You don't have to be sorry, Noah. We're okay now. That's what matters." Noah nodded, resting his head on her shoulder. "I love you, Emma." One afternoon, after picking Emma and Noah up from school, Thomas decided to stop at a small bakery. They sat together, sharing pastries and hot chocolate, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. As they laughed and talked, Thomas realized how far they had come as a family. The weight that had once hung over them had lifted, replaced by warmth and trust. Emma was smiling more often now, real, unguarded smiles that reached her eyes. Noah was thriving at school, and Thomas himself felt more connected to his children than ever before. When they returned home that evening, Thomas pulled Emma aside. "I'm proud of you, Emma," he said. "You've been so strong. And I know it hasn't been easy." Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Dad, for everything. Thomas pulled her into a hug. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt truly safe. One day, Thomas received a letter from Clarissa's lawyer. She was contesting the divorce, demanding compensation and threatening to fight for custody of Noah. Thomas read the letter with a calm resolve. He knew that Clarissa's power over his family was gone, and he wouldn't let her disrupt their new life. With the help of his lawyer, Thomas responded swiftly and firmly. He filed for full custody of both children and ensured that Clarissa would have no legal claim to them. The process was draining, but knowing he was fighting for his children gave him strength. As they left the courthouse, Thomas turned to his children. "It's over," he said, his voice filled with relief. Emma smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "We did it." Months passed, and life slowly found its rhythm again. Buddy became a beloved member of the family, always ready with a wagging tail and a soft nuzzle when anyone needed comfort. Emma's grades improved, and she even joined an art club at school, discovering a talent for painting that she never knew she had. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Noah looked up from his plate. "We should take Buddy to the lake again sometime," he said. Thomas and Emma exchanged smiles. "That sounds like a great idea," Thomas said. And so, on a bright summer morning, they packed a picnic and headed back to the lake. Buddy ran along the shore, barking happily as Noah chased after him. Emma stood at the water's edge, watching her family with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Thomas came up beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. Emma nodded, her heart full. "Yeah. I think we're going to be just fine." They stood together, watching the sun rise higher in the sky, the water shimmering like a promise of new beginnings. For the first time in a long time, Emma knew that they were finally free, free to laugh, free to love, and free to be happy. Years later, Emma would look back on those difficult times with a sense of quiet pride. She had survived. More than that, she had grown. Her relationship with Noah blossomed, and Thomas never faltered in his commitment to being the father they deserved. As she graduated from high school, Emma stood on the stage, scanning the audience for her family. There they were, Thomas, Noah, and Buddy sitting happily on Thomas's lap, tail wagging. Emma smiled, knowing that no matter where life took them, they would always have each other. And that was more than enough.